There's so many rules in 40K, hundreds of events, and constant updates. Skip the learning curve of Warhammer and join the pros. Art of War is led by multiple world champions with decades of success. We teach clinics, stream games, and inspire you to succeed at your favorite hobby. Join our global community of gamers just like you.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another Art of War video. I'm John Lennon.
Richard Siegler.
This is Richard Siegler. We are here today to talk to you. It's a nice Monday morning. We're here to talk to you about, it's actually Monday afternoon. We're here to talk to you about tournaments.
It's John's morning.
It's John's morning. Hey, I've been up for a while. I've been up for like 6 hours. It's impressive for me.
But yes, we're here to talk about the tournament formats. Obviously, we are competitive players. We love playing all the different formats. And boy, John, is there quite a few of them.
There are quite a few of them. We just want to talk about all the different formats you can play right now. You know, there's so many different countries that Warhammer is popular in. Even in one country, you know, even here in the United States, there's quite a few different formats. There's a lot to digest. There's a lot to go through, you know, and there's a lot to consider before you go to an event.
Definitely. So we just want to give you kind of like a quick and easy guide to the different tournament formats.
Absolutely. I may or may not be able to get Richard to pick his favorite at the end of this. We'll see if I can break through. What do you think?
I play favorites, John.
You play favorites?
Every once in a while.
There we go. That's what I want to see.
It's not chaos. That's
It's never chaos. All right. You ready for this? Should we dive in?
Yep. Where do you want to start?
You know what? I think we actually start with Frontline terrain. I think we start off with, you know, kind of that tried and true. They've been doing it for a while. They've had this terrain set for now several years. They've put the spin on it with player place terrain. I think they're the ones that really popularized bringing player place terrain back in.
Yeah.
So I guess let's talk about it.
They popularized several things because they popularized having each table have a unique kind of setup.
Yes.
So they have, like 6 different tables that you can potentially see at one of their events. And then they had also tried in 8th edition going ahead and placing down terrain based on the deployment zones.
Yeah.
They moved away from that and instead have gone to player placed, which is a new evolution on trying to make sure that terrain is actually useful in your games. Because sometimes, you know, when it's not useful, it feels real bad.
Yeah, and I actually like the Frontline terrain format quite a bit. One of the things that they do is before every one of their super majors, they put out a document. It's usually very similar to the last one, but so you can still practice it before it comes out. But it has every possible table listed, and then it defines and puts keywords on every piece of terrain.
Yep, no mystery.
I'm going to be honest, I never remember to have the conversation of like what a terrain piece is. And when I do, all I do is like, hey, so that's obscuring, right? They're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, great. I know I'm talking about light cover, heavy cover, dense cover. I'm like, hey, this is either a rune or it's a forest. And that's the extent of my pregame. Like armored container, I don't know, probably a forest. Like, let's move on.
Industrial structures, John.
Industrial structures, I don't know. So I love that the Frontline terrain format has specifically keywords for every piece of terrain you might encounter, and you know what the tables are, but I also like that the tables aren't identical.
Definitely. There is some variety there, whether you're playing at a team event or a singles event. They try and use at least 4 of the different tables, and sometimes up to 6 of them.
Yep.
Now, in addition, in that packet, there's also a bunch of other goodies, which you can get access to their code of conduct. They have a specific set of guidelines for how you play at those events, how you talk to your opponent, the types of things that you can use, how to use chess clocks. That's all very important. In addition to that, they do a FAQ series before each of their events. So they have a list of questions. They'll say what event that ruling is for, and usually they carry on from event to event. Exactly, but you can always double check. So I like that running FAQ that they have for all the kind of major questions that Games Workshop doesn't address. Yeah,
it's certainly unofficial. You know, I don't think any of the
nope.
You know, this is not the word of GW, but it does actually run over.
It answers questions.
Yeah, like it has questions like when I was looking at the SoCal questions and answers, because I was kind of curious on some rulings, I saw that they still had the Lone Star questions in, and I even saw that some of them that I had asked previously had been removed or had been updated, but some of them were still there. So they do keep this document going. So I like Frontline format a lot. I think that its terrain format is relatively easy to replicate because any TO can look at the terrain they have in store,
Yep.
and they can be like, yep, we're going to put these keywords on it, and we're going to use their player place terrain format.
So a couple things to note. Their terrain was designed in 7th and 8th edition,
Yeah.
and so there are pieces that aren't quite as effective in 9th edition, and they have a lot of forests and flat pieces. So one of the things that they did in their putting keywords, very unique keywords onto forests, is they made them obscuring.
Yep.
And I believe they also gave them light cover.
I believe so.
I believe that forests have pretty much all the main keywords.
I love obscuring.
So they tried to put as many defensive mechanics into the terrain pieces as possible, like the Necron Obelisk table, which, my gosh, does that have a lot of firing angles and lines of sight. There's a bunch of narrow pylons and stuff on it, and generators. But what they did was they went ahead and put dense cover on a lot of those pieces, as well as light cover, and then obscuring. So small things can hide behind it, but if you're not small, you can at least still get some benefits.
Yeah, and understandably, they don't want to go rebuy a new 800 tables every edition. I don't blame them for that. Yep. So I think that compared to what we saw at the Atlantic City Open, I think Lone Star Open is when they started doing player place terrain, and for Lone Star, Las Vegas teams, and SoCal, honestly, I've been seeing pretty good feedback about their terrain in general. Like I think most people have enjoyed it.
It seriously helps.
Yeah, I do actually kind of want to talk about the player placed aspect as well.
I figured that'd be the big part of it.
Yeah, so again, this one is, I think, relatively unique to Frontline, but they've basically made all of their tables symmetrical or very close to, and they define what each half is. So when you go up to the table, there's no mystery of like, hey, do I get the extra trees? Do I get this? No. It's defined in the packet who gets, it's split in half. You choose between halves because they're identical. And you get to know your deployment zone before you start placing terrain, and you can only place it in your half.
Yep.
And compared to what we've seen with player place terrain in past editions at Adepticons, this is, in my opinion, greatly improved.
So much better.
Being able to, make your own defense, set up your, choose where you're fighting, it makes a ton of sense. It's not like if I'm walking up and my captain's like, hey, you need to go get the map inside the ruin. I'm like, is that ruin in the middle of a parade ground surrounded by sniper towers? Like, yeah. What? Why? What do you mention? I'm like, oh, no reason. Let me just walk over there and get it. Like, what? This isn't where I'm fighting the AdMech. Yeah. Like, I'm not fighting the AdMech in the open. Like, I don't like when people get to choose terrain on my side and they start putting, like, ruins in a corner when hiding nothing. And I'm like, oh, man.
There was a particularly notorious game which happened between, I think it was Colin Sherman and somebody else. And the terrain, it was player place terrain. I think it was Renegade Open a while ago. And they just one player had a bunch of lootas and wanted to place the terrain on the outskirts, and Colin wanted a lot of stuff in the middle. And so it was like a hodgepodge table where big ruins were in the corners and a bunch of small stuff was in the center, and there's barely any line of sight blocking. So it turns the game into a go first type of win situation. So yeah. I'm glad Frontline really made some nice improvements on that type of style.
And even though we had some issues at a recent tournament with SoCal with a notorious one-turn game, I still think that the Frontline tournament, the Frontline terrain, especially the player place terrain, is relatively good at stopping directional shooting from tabling you. Flyers, I think it doesn't really help as much with. But that's not a fault of Frontlines, I think that's every single terrain format, so I'm not gonna blame them for that one.
Even Games Workshop terrain format.
Exact same problems, yeah.
But indirect fire and planes, they just ignore terrain, and that's why they're so powerful.
Indeed. So that's the Frontline terrain format. I think you see people kind of copy this or do something similar to this at other events. I've been to local events where they have player place terrain, and they're just like, yep, we put these keywords on these things. And, split into half. This is the half. If you have any questions, call the TO. We'll split in half for you. And you find out your deployment zone, you place it all down. And I just really, really enjoy that. It also does, of course, bring fortifications back into the game, as you can leave enough room to put a fortification on your side. Whereas if it's preset terrain, it's frankly up to the will of the Emperor whether or not you're going to actually place a Battle Sanctum down.
Totally.
I don't like that.
Now, for Frontline, I haven't played it as much as you, but I played it at the team event. Yeah. And honestly, I felt like winning the roll-off to decide who places the first terrain was really important, especially on missions with center objectives. Being able to say I'm the AdMech army and I want those objectives out in the open. Well, I'm on the table with that giant ruin with a huge base. I go ahead and put that within range of both objectives, not on them, of course, but close enough where my opponent now can't place terrain pieces on them.
On it, yeah.
So now they're just two middle objectives wide out in the open, and I did that in like 2 different games because I kept getting that table. So maybe there's something where the player who places the first piece of terrain can't place it within 4 inches of the center of the board or something like that.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, but then at that point, it's just then the second player
player.
just does the same thing. There is definitely an element to that. One of the things that actually, if I were to pick a bone, it would be that by definition, if you only place in your half, there's never a terrain piece straddling the middle of the board.
Yeah.
Because it's always in one half or the other, so there's like a line where there's no terrain pieces touching. And that means that it's sometimes very easy to walk up and touch ruins to see through them because there's nothing truly in the center. It's always on one side or the other.
Yep.
So it's very easy to, in your deployment zone, just walk up, touch, turn one, and shoot through.
Yeah.
Because the frontline terrain usually has a lot of windows. Because it's MDF.
And large bases.
And large bases as well.
Yeah. I found that too. Like playing on that one particular table, their LVO 2019 style, where it had 2 large ruins, 4 like hill things, and then some forests and armored containers. I basically every time put my ruin as close to the center as possible, right at the edge of my deployment line. So I deployed behind it, and then my army moved up and then got to shoot wherever it wanted.
Yep.
In the center of the board.
Yeah, those big ruins that does create a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, because it is important to note that they do have a window in almost every ruin there. There are a couple of small magic boxes, but those are usually you're not fitting anything larger than 5 intercessors in.
Yeah, they're pretty much only on the orc table.
And the orc table, and then there's one other.
The Necron table has some like weird stuff, but you can't go inside.
Yeah, that mining table.
Yes.
That one, it doesn't have it's not a true magic box, but there's 2 walls without windows. So since you player place it, you can usually angle it to hide pretty well. But if someone gets around behind you, they can potentially shoot.
Yeah.
All right. So that's Frontline. Again, we see that very commonly in the United States. I haven't seen a ton of Frontline terrain formats in other countries yet. But speaking of, do you want to talk about WTC?
Sure, let's do WTC.
Okay.
So the World Team Championships, formerly known as the ETC, it is predominantly for team events. It's designed for 8-person team events. They have, I think they have more than 8 different table styles, but they keep updating them, and it's roughly 8 different styles, and it's designed for the World Team Championships.
Yeah.
However, a lot of European tournaments have adopted their terrain style and bought the terrain package that they use and have used it in singles events.
Yeah, because I think that you can basically just buy the tables as they are. I believe that everything that in the WTC tables now is an MDF, right? So
it's easy to just jam together.
Yeah, it doesn't take up a ton of storage space, relatively easy to paint. I don't think it's that expensive. I've looked at the tables online.
Yep.
Relatively easy to do. So that's good. It's nice and accessible. You really see it a lot throughout Europe. Sometimes the UK does their own thing, but especially like continental Europe, a ton of tournaments there use WTC format.
Yeah. Very similar to Frontline, they also use their own FAQ, which is extremely detailed.
Yes.
It has questions for every sub-faction, the main rules, all of it. So if there's a question Games Workshop has not answered, WTC has almost certainly done so. There's an active team of constantly updating that.
Yeah, and they're usually pretty indicative of what's going to come down from GW.
Yeah.
It's never exactly the same. Well, sometimes it is. But you can never, rely on that. But it is nice that it's often indicative of what will come in the future. So if you play WTC format and use their FAQ, you're unlikely to get blindsided by a GW FAQ that's just like, oh, no, it's the complete opposite. That usually doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the actual train.
Yep.
So they've got 8 tables. I don't think for singles play you use all 8. I think both the light and heavy ones.
Yeah.
Because my understanding is for WTC, they've got 8 tables for each match. And I believe that 2 of them are relatively light, 2 of them are relatively heavy, and 4 of them are what is considered a normal or middle table. But even so, they all have slightly different layouts.
Exactly.
And I don't think that they change based on the deployment zone.
No, I think they're the same regardless. But it works because they don't use giant L's. Yep. Instead, they use a couple like medium-sized L's, L-shaped ruins, and then a bunch of smaller ones. And then they use forests quite liberally as well.
Yes. Yeah, there's usually a lot of forests in there. Also, they usually have a kind of a mix on whether or not their ruins have windows. So I believe that there are some ruins that specifically don't have windows in them. So you can hunker up right up against them. There are some that are, that there are like windows on top, but they're not on the bottom. So again, like an infantry squad can just hug pretty easily. But there's a lot of these like big walls that are just very easy to hide behind, and you can get right up against. And having that kind of, dense line of sight blocking terrain really helps infantry builds a lot in the WTC format. It rewards those fast infantry like Venetari, or we even see assault marines doing well sometimes.
Vanguard vets,
all that stuff. Maybe rust stalkers,
gene stealers, rust stalkers.
Maybe rust stalkers. I don't know. For sure. Are those even good?
Pretty good.
They're alright. Like almost incubi level.
But the thing is, unlike the frontline terrain, it's really actually quite difficult to get firing angles in the middle of the table.
Yes.
You have to have some sort of combat element. It really does force you towards having a lot of MSU trading pieces and strong, powerful melee. So I think, obviously flyer builds and indirect, like we talked about, can still get around a lot of the benefits of this terrain, but they have designed the format to have games play out. They want games going into turns 4 and 5 and still be in question.
So I mean, it's more entertaining that way, frankly.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, the WTC format is quite popular. Again, the ability to hide units and the density of it is notable. It's not player placed though, so sometimes you can get a bad army or like on the wrong table. But for WTC specifically, that's part of the pairings process. For singles play, I think it's mostly mitigated by the fact that you know what you're getting going into it. Yep. And I would be willing to bet that a lot of people who go to these tournaments have a set at their own house. So they're usually not surprised when they find out, my Megara does not fit behind this ruin. They're never going to be surprised by that because it's very standardized. It's not like they, try to get the same dimensions. They print out the exact same terrain piece several times. So it's always going to be consistent and the same. And a lot of people really like that consistency.
Yeah. I think with having like 8+ medium to smaller ruins on a board, it's actually quite easy to move block larger models.
Yeah.
That's
very true.
I think one of the earlier critiques of their terrain was the fact that like people were showing Telemons not being able to walk really anywhere. But I think they adjusted the terrain to help those larger models. But still, with that much type of ruins all over the board, it is difficult for vehicles to walk as effectively as otherwise.
We've got actually quite an interesting comment if you want to. That is a difference between the WTC format. If you want to read that one, Richard.
Yeah, WTC infantry can stop mid-wall of a ruin using wobbly model. No unchargeable by staying 0.9 away. Makes a big difference to close combat infantry.
Yes, I can fully believe that. I actually like that better. I always thought that it was a little too weird that I was too close to charge.
Yeah. So what we're trying to talk about here is, let's say you've got your nice L-shaped ruin, or let's make it a U-shaped ruin.
Yeah.
Something like the Games Workshop format style. You can go ahead and put your, these warriors, these lovely warriors are inside the ruin. Well, guess what, John? They're not within an inch of the wall. They're slightly behind.
Nope.
But you have 32 millimeter bases or 40 millimeter bases.
That's more than an inch.
It's more than an inch. So you cannot physically place your model inside that wall to get within an inch, which means you have to come all the way around, which might be an impossible charge.
Yeah. It can mean that it's like a 20-inch charge to walk around these walls and get to the warriors, but then if the warriors come out themselves, it's like a 6-inch charge.
Yeah.
So it can lead to some weird scenarios there. Yeah, I know WTC doesn't use that. That definitely makes a change.
I believe
for the better.
I believe Frontline and Games Workshop use the other way, where you can't. There are available charges because of your positioning.
Yeah, where you can stop people from physically being placed and make them go the long way around.
Yep.
It would be nice if WTC and ITC had a singular unified FAQ. Right now, I guess they just don't. They are two separate entities. I don't think ITC runs anything outside of the United States. I don't think WTC runs anything in North America. So those have kind of just become the de facto, FAQs for that region.
Yeah.
Definitely, I would love it though if they ever, connected, or maybe if GW, were to publish some FAQs of their own.
Yeah, I know. GW always they always have the option.
There's always the option. You never know you're going to get there.
But overall, very popular format, particularly in Europe. But it is used internationally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's come back to our side of the pond. Let's talk about Games Workshop. After that, we should actually look up some of the London GT terrain formats.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about these tournament formats, we want to talk about the pairing process as well, like random win path versus Swiss.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I feel like we should mention it because it seems that more and more people are switching over to random win path. So Swiss is a very traditional where usually round 1 is fully random. And I think that's the same for every format.
Yep.
You go in.
You just can't play your own team.
Round 1 pairings are random. You just don't play your own teammates. And then with Swiss format, round 2 is you take the number 1 and number 2 player, and they play each other. Then you take 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and you just go down the line, and everyone plays each other. And this has led to some weird scenarios where people will intentionally not get a lot of points, or they'll check the scorings before they submit their own scores, which may or may not be against a particular mission pack. But it also feels weird no matter what.
Like, why?
It's like, yeah, am I really are my intercessors intentionally abandoning an objective specifically because they're scared of Skitaria Rangers? I mean, maybe mine are, but it doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
So
but if you're there to win the event, you should be able to beat any of the top
go
players.
through it anyways. but that has been the dominant one for a while. I think in Europe they still use it sometimes. To my understanding, WTC is still Swiss pairings, but also because the WTC itself is so far away, I don't know if they've actually made a decision on that. Swiss could work if we ever put an ELO system in, but right now that seems far off. So I'm personally in favor of random win path, where you're paired randomly within your win path, which means that you take all of the 1-0 players on round 2 and you make it random within them. And then you take all of the 2-0 players round 3 and make it randomly paired within them. And then you do the same thing. And kind of an extension to this, which is very popular at the Games Workshop events, so I bring it up, and kind of a holdover from Nova format for some reason, is that they'll then pair within your path of record. So for example, if you're 1-1, start of round 3, you're 1-1, and you lost your second game, you're going to pair into a 1-1 who lost their second game. Because losing your first game, winning your second, theoretically on the scoreboard looks the same as winning your first, losing your second, but it's a different experience, and it can represent a different, ability. Because, you lost to someone random round 1, and then you beat someone who had already taken a loss, versus getting a win and then losing to someone else who had a win. I think it's more reflective, the further you get into a tournament, right?
Exactly.
Like a 4-1 who lost round 1 and round 5 have had very different experiences to get there.
Yep.
So they use that as like the first tiebreaker of pairings. And then after that, I think it goes back to being random. And they'll still use points as a final ranking system, but the actual pairings is just done. Now, there are pros and cons of this. Notably is that whenever there's an odd number of players, you sometimes have people who will pair down. An example of this is at the Crucible Major a couple weeks ago. The Grey Knight player who took first place after 6 rounds, he was 6-0. He was in first place after 5 rounds too. He was in first place, but the 2 and 3 seeds played each other because it was random with win path, and then he paired down and ended up in his round 6 playing one of the 4-1s, but it was a random 4-1, and so he ended up playing the first place player ended up playing like 8th place, while second and third played each other. And then, of course, that first place player got enough points to keep his ranking, finished in first at the end of the event, went 6-0, earned that, but it's kind of weird to where you have the player in first playing against someone in 8th in it. Every once in a while with a random win path, that'll pop up, whereas Swiss just is not going to happen.
Yeah. I think, could they just add strength of schedule in there, and then between 6-0s, and then have the 6-0 with the stronger...
Maybe do strength of schedule instead of...
Yeah.
But then it also feels weird because it's like, oh, well, now this guy is screwed because he got randomly paired into a worse player. Now he doesn't have a chance. Even if
That's
he gets
fair. But he's getting an easier
points.
chance to win.
True, but like even if he gets 600 points, like
I mean, there's no perfect system, but I'd rather strength of schedule. I think
I think that for me the easy answer is just 1 undefeated.
That's also
as
true.
long as there's 1 undefeated, I don't mind.
It's hard for events to run more than 6 rounds.
It is though, yeah, and especially if you want to get larger than 64 people at that point, that is a little difficult.
Yeah. So the practicalities of just tournaments can come up. But yeah,
right.
I much prefer the random win path. I don't really care who I play. Just line them up. Line them up, John.
Line them up.
Going.
We'll go through it.
I had to play Mark. You have to play Mark. Let's just go.
I didn't want to play Mark.
Let's beat these freebooters.
I played Mark too early. All right, let's talk about Games Workshop.
Yep.
Let's talk about the terrain. Yeah, you are clearly the expert on this one. Take the lead here.
All right, so Games Workshop terrain. It's a brand new format. This is apparently the terrain that 9th edition was designed to be played on, according to Mike Brandt. This is the type of terrain that he practices on, that he does his testing on. So, what is it? It's 4 large ruins with large bases, but these ruins don't have any holes in windows on the first floor.
Yep,
all right,
none at all. And if there are any, you pretend they're not there.
You pretend that they're not there. And these are 12 by 12 bases, so quite sizable. You get light cover on there, and it's pretty easy to hide quite a bit of models in there before there are firing angles, because the ruin itself goes about halfway down the terrain, and then the rest of it is open on the backside. So there's 4 of these, 2 in each deployment zone. So you pretty much always have guaranteed line of sight blocking on your deployment zone, enough to hide the vast majority of your army, unless it's super heavies or really large bulky models like an orc army full of buggies.
Sure.
On top of that, there are 4 forests on the board, and they're usually on the outskirts. But there's 2 styles of terrain. So there's a Dawn of War style, and then there's a Hammer and Anvil, other types of style. So on the Dawn of War style, you have it long ways, 2 ruins, and then you have 2 smaller ruins. I believe it's 8 by 10 by 8 something.
I think it's 10 by 6.
10 by 6, yeah.
10 by 6.
2 10 by 6 on the outsides, and that's to make sure that there's no easy firing angles onto the entire side of the table that you can actually move up the sides, especially when objectives are there, and get value out of that. And then the forests are on the four corners on the Dawn of War style. On the Hammer and Anvil style, the ruins, the two large ones, are offset a bit. One's a little more farther forward, one's a little back, and then the forests are on the two middle sides between the ruins, and then the two central areas, and then the smaller ruins are in the middle itself. So there's only one firing angle directly from side to side, and that's straight down the center, and it's about like an inch or so wide.
Or on like the very far outskirts of each side. But
exactly.
It's relatively easy to deploy out of that if you're trying to.
Exactly. So a lot of amazing line of sight blocking, and there's giant spaces in each side of the board in order to shove melee units across the table at each other.
I do like shoving melee units.
So fast melee is amazing on this format. We've seen it with my Advance and Charge Ruststalkers.
No kidding.
Any of the White Scars Vanguard vets would do well there. John had his Repentia advancing and charging out of those ruins. So anything that's a fast mobile melee unit is very powerful on this terrain format. In addition to that, your firing units, they need to be mobile. If they're slow, they're not really doing a lot. They're only shooting at what your opponent allows them to shoot at. So in order to actually dictate the pace of the game with shooting, you need to be able to get angles, and that means coming up into the center of the board where you can be hit by counter assault. So there's a nice give and take between shooting and combat in this format that I really like. I like defensive shooting pieces or mobile shooting pieces. Defensive shooting can stay in your deployment zone and pick off the things that go onto objectives turn after turn for you, so you don't have to send extra resources to do that. And then I like mobile shooting pieces like Cerberus Raiders that can move around the sides, get angles, and also contest objectives at the same time. Those work really well, and then you have a bunch of melee trading pieces like Ruststalkers and Infiltrators. That's why I built the core of my Metallica list around. Had to run some flyers just due to meta changes, orcs, at New Orleans, but I think any list that builds around that style of several fast mobile melee elements and then a couple mobile shooting elements, a couple defensive shooting elements is just going to have a good time on that terrain. If you skew too hard in one direction, that's where things can get a little difficult.
Yeah, anytime you do a skew list, especially on the Games Workshop terrain, it can get punished. We saw a couple of like really like big heavy walker lists that did fine, but didn't do as well. Like the traditional Space Marine Dreadnought builds didn't do as well in Games Workshop terrain as they did on some other formats. Because, again, one of the notable things here is that there's no windows. So if you go touch a ruin, you don't just get to shoot the contents. Likewise, if someone touches a ruin, they're not immediately, in the spotlight. The second a guardsman touches a ruin at a Frontline gaming terrain, every Volkite within 45 inches perks up and is like, who just did that? you did what? Games Workshop, no problem. You can go touch the wall, get that light cover, hide right up against the wall, and you're not going to get shot immediately. It's different, but it does work. One of my only complaints about the Games Workshop style is that the dense cover is extremely hard to get in some deployments. In Dawn of War, there actually isn't any dense cover as far as I'm concerned.
It's because they're on the outside extremes of the table.
They're literally they're touching the corners. They're touching the four corners, and they're not very large, so you can't realistically be on this and then interact with an objective in any way. And at that point, it's a question of, do I want to be in this forest and a little bit slower in the very corner of the board, or do I just want to be behind a wall? And I have never once chosen to be seen and -1 to hit instead of being not seen. I guess maybe against really heavy indirect you could try it, but even then it's slowing you down and it's literally in a back corner, so it's just going to take you an extra turn to get to the indirect.
Honestly, there's an extra 10 inches basically off the edge of the table to the first ruin. They could easily move the forest up into a more central area that's closer to the ruins.
I would really love to see those forests.
And that means you can also still go in the corner and hide behind the forest if you needed to, if you wanted to get, retrieve Octaria.
Yeah, I would love that you just push them all 6 or 8 inches forward so that they're just a little bit more relevant to the deployment zone.
Yeah.
Also a little bit in, so they're not just on the edge. Other than that, though, it's great for obscuring terrain, setting up, melee units, and it encourages fast shooting units, which mobile shooting units are usually, a little harder to get. It's also a little more fun to, for your opponent to come to you and shoot rather than sit all the way over there and shoot. Exactly. I don't like when they're all the way downtown.
So it does, if you're using shooting units, the ability to move after shooting is extremely powerful on this terrain. 100%. To get back into transports, get back behind terrain, means you don't have to trade that extra resource.
For sure.
And there's so many angles you could potentially go behind. So love this terrain format. I think it is one of the best. It's my favorite that I've played on. I know John was going to ask favorites later, but I'll just say it now. This is my favorite.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. You've done pretty well on it.
But not to say it's perfect. I just feel like it's the best out of them, and it requires. I don't need to set up the terrain. Player place, it's always that extra times to set up, and honestly, most of the games look the same anyway.
Yeah.
Based on I played on most of the same tables, but honestly, if my opponent and I came up with, here's what we did, turn after, table after table, it actually looked pretty darn similar.
Certainly, it did. I just like that there's a little more agency in placing forests and other types of terrain rather than just big old obscuring ruin in the middle. That is what Games Workshop is every time, which I like obscuring ruins.
That's what it was at Frontline for me. I was just like, here's my ruin, boom.
Yeah, well,
it's central. But I much prefer having first floor block line of sight.
That's
especially on giant ruins. If your ruin is huge, like some of those Frontline ruins, and has a big base on it, where I could put an entire Admic army touching that thing, and just shoot down across the table, that's too much.
Yep, that's true.
I actually like first floor blocks line of sight still as a role. So I do much prefer it on Games Workshop terrain.
That's true. That part is really nice. Really, I just want the force to be moved a little bit.
I want the game. I like games when they play out to turns 4 and 5. I want the game to play out and make it about decisions and not just take.
Not turn 1?
No.
What? Turn 1 is so good. One player.
I don't want my games done after 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a lot of time. A lot of time traveling and not a lot of time playing. All right, right on. What other formats you want to discuss here?
Warzone. You're playing Warzone soon.
I am playing Warzone.
Warzone has player place terrain.
Yeah,
but it's different.
It does. While I'm talking about this one, why don't you go ahead and pull up the London GT style? Because
I already know.
You already know it?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Okay, good. Because I don't. So, Warzone terrain. Warzone Atlanta is a tournament in the United States, and it has its own unique style. Warzone Atlanta usually likes to do its own thing. It's usually well received. They play tested all year, so it's not just random out of the blue, here's a different format. But for this year, what they're doing is player place terrain with MDF terrain. So again, they're standardizing every table so that you know what you're going into. They're doing a lot of smaller pieces here. So what they're doing is you do player place terrain, but you do it before you know which side is which. I'll admit I don't prefer that style, but there is a lot of terrain on there, so you can still make some things work. Basically, there's 2 large ruins that are they're big L's. One of the sides has windows, one doesn't, so you can angle it to take advantage of that.
Yep.
And then there's 2 large stacks of cargo containers that completely block line of sight and are tall enough to easily hide like a decent sized model behind you. You're not going to be able to hide a knight behind it, but frankly, a contemptor could fit behind it pretty easily. A jump infantry, like height wise, can hide behind it as well. And then there's 2 large forests. And then there's 4 small ruins, again obscuring. 2 small cargo containers. I think 2 defense lines.
Defense lines?
Yeah, I think I already mentioned the 2 small forests. There's 2 big forests, 2 small forests, 2 craters. So there's a total of 6 obscuring terrain pieces. 4 of them big, 2 of them are 4 small, 2 big, and then there's 2 large cargo container stacks that kind of function as an obscuring ruin as well. 4 forests, bunch of craters, and there's all these little things that you place alternating. And they actually have limits on like what is a major versus a minor piece, and you have to put them down all the major pieces first. So I think there's 8 major pieces. You can find all this on their website, Warzone Atlanta. But you have to place all the major pieces first. There's 10 total, I'm sorry, and you have to do at least 2 in each table quarter. And you do this again before you know which side is which. So even if your opponent is placing 2 like a big ruin all the way in the corner facing the middle so that it does literally nothing. Okay, you put one in a deployment zone covering an objective. They put another one down. You put another one down on the opposite side covering an objective. You're going to get to place at least 5 of these major terrain pieces, which means you can at least have 2 or 3 of them in a good spot in each deployment zone, is the idea.
Yeah.
So it's not all going to be useful, but some of it will be. And then there's like really a lot of like light terrain, like their defense lines give heavy cover, and of course our defense lines, which I had to look up what that did because you rarely see those at events.
You really don't.
Craters, forest. There's a nice diverse mix, which I like, and again, it's standardized, so you know what the size is going to be if you play on it at home. I personally haven't played on their official sets, but I imagine that a lot of people in the area who go to this event, because it's a very popular event, I imagine that they've all played at a set at an event or have a set of their own. They know exactly what the size is going to be. They know what's going to fit. I've only played 1 game with the format, just as a little warm-up, just to kind of see what it was like. I'll admit I still prefer placing your terrain once you know whose side is which, but I also get the appeal of like there's more of a mini game rather than every single L points towards the enemy and I hide behind it, which admittedly is what my player place terrain usually looks like.
Yeah. It'll make the tables look like my critique of the Frontline one. The fact that the tables ended up looking pretty darn similar, regardless. And then in this one, they are going to look different.
100%.
They're going to look quite a bit different from game to game. But there's a whole bunch of extra layers on this. And I'm not going to the event, but I saw the mission packet and I was like, this is a lot of extra steps, honestly. And this is just this is just placing terrain. Like, let's just have a standard format and go.
Yeah, this is definitely one that if you wanted to go to the event, you would want to practice it a couple of times.
Yep.
I think it's been played in a lot of tournaments in the Southeast as well. But I haven't seen it much outside of the Southeast.
Yeah.
And so that's why I only played.
It's another player-placed format, but extra layer of steps, but it is going to make the tables look different. So that is.
I think anytime you have a player-placed terrain event that you're thinking of going to, you really want to not even just play on it. You want to practice setting up a table 2 or 3 times. Like just
even
like
more than that, honestly.
Yeah.
Matchups,
yeah. That
there's enough matches.
More than 2 or 3 times. Yeah. Absolutely, because like I'm so not excited for the AdMech player who's just like, I'm gonna see everything, and I have to be like, no, and I'm trying to cover all of the
frantically
holes while he's like actively tossing pieces out. Like,
it's like, can I just throw these away?
Yeah. It's gonna be
my
tricky.
planes don't like these.
Yeah.
Get 'em out.
Planes don't need walls. Goodbye. I don't want that. All right.
Heading back across the Atlantic, we have the LGT style. Now, this style received a decent amount of notoriety. What was it, a month and a half ago? 2 months
I think
ago?
like early September. Yeah, 2 months.
Yeah. So, what is LGT? Well, LGT is the London Grand Tournament, but they are running a series of other events across the UK, I believe, and maybe they're trying to expand to Europe. But I know it's certainly in the UK. And the LGT had something like 600 plus players.
Yeah, it was a very large event.
Massive event. So what is this terrain format? Well, in the middle, there are 2 large ruins, and then there are 2 like crate / like container formations that can help block line of sight. And then your deployment zone, there's 1 large kind of largest ruin each. But there's not a ton of terrain outside of that, based on the overall map. There's like some smaller pieces, but none that are really affecting line of sight and obscuring.
Yeah.
So unlike Frontline, where they put obscuring onto a lot of their smaller pieces just to give that extra dimension, LGT did not do that, and it meant that shooting armies just were having a field day there.
Yeah.
This obviously resulted in a finals match in which Alex Harrison's Iron Hands conceded turn 1 after losing like 4+ dreadnoughts.
Yep.
In their deployment zone. So the firing angles were too much. So they've gone ahead and added. I believe it was the event in Coventry. They've gone ahead and added, I believe, 2 more ruins.
Okay.
To help with the line of sight blocking issue. But I think you saw a combination of problems. Not enough line of sight blocking in the deployment zones, and then the big ruins in the middle, too easy to. The first person to get there basically got to dictate the entire center of the board because they could easily touch the second ruin and you couldn't hide behind it. And so you really need, if you were a melee army, you needed to go first, get behind the middle ruin, and then be able to push their ruin the next turn. So it just emphasized first, not only with the shooting angles, but also being able to hit your opponent in the center. So it favored going first far too much.
Yeah.
But they've gone ahead and added some more pieces to that. We're going to see if that's effective or not. I haven't heard enough about that event if it happened yet, but it is one of the other big formats in the UK, certainly.
For sure. And another thing that kind of denoted about it is they had a couple of ruins in there that were not 5 inches tall.
Yeah.
And that meant that they did not give obscuring. They didn't have windows though. So you could hide things behind it. There were small windows, I want to say about this big, and I actually saw some pictures of people who were testing and decided that a Redemptor Dreadnought could hide behind it and not be seen. But it was purely because there was a lack of windows, not because it was obscuring. So anything a little bit taller, like Invictors, which are like a half an inch taller than a Redemptor, cannot hide behind this thing.
Or if you have a banner or something on there,
if you have perhaps a sail of some kind, if you're holding your gun in an awkward pose, you're just getting seen. You're done. So that was another thing, was that like it favored like the smaller models that could hide because there wasn't that much space to hide. That's why we had a lot of infantry and then planes, because planes, it's like you're accepting, I'm getting seen, this is okay, I'm just going to work with it, and I'm going to go see you. And that, as you saw, really played out in some of the top armies there.
Yep. There have been some other major tournament formats, like Adepticon historically had its own format. We have not seen Adepticon in 2 years, so we're not sure what they're going to do, but it is going to happen again next year. Like Renegade runs a series of events, and they used to run fairly unique ones, but I'm not sure what they're doing now.
Yeah.
So do you know any other ones that
obviously Nova, but again, there's been no news
also
on
hasn't
Nova.
happened,
Yeah, a lot of the main US tournaments, like the circuits are intact, the Frontline Gaming, but a lot of the old guard, like Adepticon, Nova, Renegade, we haven't really seen much from them. And a lot of the major events now are like advertising themselves as a format. So like, for example, a major I went to 2 weeks ago advertised themselves as Games Workshop format. And sure enough, every table had the 12 by 12 squares with, a scattering of ruins on it. And, the same thing, they're like, hey, if there's a hole in the ruin, pretend it's not there on the first floor, etc.
Coventry GT is this weekend, so we'll see how it's changed. Excellent. We'll definitely follow
really
that.
Looking forward to seeing those
Hopefully it's
results.
improved, because there was a lot of negativity about the event, and but I think that the TO took that in stride and is going to make changes.
Yeah, LGT has been good at that historically, where they've had some terrain conversations, shall we say, before, and they've been able to improve their format each time. So I'm happy to hear that they've made some changes. I'm really looking forward to those results and what that meta looks like.
All right, before we get to the chat questions.
Yes.
So I said my favorite was the GW format. I like that it, outside of the specific orc list that can just destroy you in your deployment zone regardless of what you're playing.
Yep.
Besides that list, it results in games that play out to turns 4 and 5.
Yeah.
And I really like when games come down to that final turn. It makes it exciting. It makes it awesome, especially if it's being streamed. It's just more fun to play too for me. Like I want an actual back and forth game. Yeah. So I like how Games Workshop terrain kind of forces that type of situation. It's a lot about trading. It requires you having both mobile shooting elements and dedicated melee units. So it requires balanced armies. I just like that a lot. I like the armies that it creates. I like the style that it creates. So and I also like that I don't have to spend any time setting up terrain. Done. It's just done.
So I like the player place terrain format of Frontline's events a lot. I will say, though, I do really like the ruins from Games Workshop. The big thing is that
It's a very diplomatic answer, John.
It is. I'm getting there. So I don't think either one is perfect. I'm actually leaning towards Frontline because of the ability to use forests, because right now I feel like the answer to some of these getting blown up in your deployment zones is having access to a lot of forests that you can hide your units in, protect, stack with your own modifiers, and try to keep your army alive. On some player place terrain formats, I've actually been able to go second against orcs and not take, and like freeboot orcs with planes and not take horrendous casualties. And so I feel like that helps tone in the most excesses. So I'm going to go ahead and say Frontline is my favorite, but I definitely like Games Workshop ruins more. So if we could somehow combine the two, that would be my favorite. Or if we can take those Games Workshop forests and put them anywhere, because I swear they're just under the table. Like, they're not even there.
Especially when they're the smattering of Mechanicus stuff.
I know, and like
it's
it doesn't even look like a forest. No. And it's like, are we using this?
But I'd rather use that than the Nurgle trees.
That's true. I hate the Nurgle trees. No, I would, if we could just move the Games Workshop forests to be somewhere useful, I think that would make it my favorite. I don't know where that would be, but Mike Brandt, help us.
Just joining any discussion on the correct number / type or size of terrain for an ideal table.
There's a ratio for each, right? For big ruins, I think 4 is a good number. I think 4, or I guess there are 6 obscuring ruins on the Games Workshop tables. So if I were to give just a blanket answer, I would say 6 obscuring ruins is my favorite number, and I would view that as a minimum. But I can see 8 if they're maybe a little bit smaller than the Games Workshop ruins. So 6 big or 8 small, I think would be my answer. I like 4 forests.
Me too. I like having one in each quadrant.
4. Yep, 1 forest in each side of the board.
Outside of that, a lot of the other terrain categories just aren't that impactful, honestly.
Yep. There are craters.
Ruins with area terrain and forests are the 2 most important terrain pieces.
Yep.
And if you start with that, the 6 pieces of obscuring ruins, regardless of size, and then the 4 forests,
100%.
It's a solid board.
It is, yeah.
You can get other stuff in there, but your defense lines, John?
Yeah, I don't need defense lines, actually. I don't really care about those.
No. But heavy cover is exceptionally rare in events, period.
When it's there, it's very
It's
useful.
on industrial structures, which events typically don't use, and then Frontline has put it on a bunch of ruins and area terrain on one of their tables or two of their tables.
Yeah, I think 2 now have it.
Two now have it.
Yeah, I don't believe it's present at all in Games Workshop. I don't think you can get heavy cover at the Games Workshop events. Same thing, I don't believe that LGT or WTC have heavy cover present, last I checked. Maybe it's been updated, so chat, let me know if I'm wrong. But I don't believe heavy cover is really prevalent in any of those formats.
Yeah, so it's an interesting mechanic to further help melee, but we just don't really see it that much.
Yep.
And then it gets to that point where you're stacking so many pluses to save, like on Terminators with Storm Shields in combat.
Yep.
That actually it's pretty difficult to kill this unit. So it might spin too much in the other direction. What do you feel the right round length is?
I like 5 and then a top 8 for most or
No, I think you're.
round length.
I think you mean the time. Well, all right. Let's do both questions.
Okay, let's
you
do
do
both,
the
yeah.
one direction.
All right, so I like it when you could cut to a top 8 and get a single undefeated. And I don't mind if you happen to have like 6, 5-0, 6-0s, and then like 2 1-loss sneak in as well. I don't mind that as well.
Yeah,
if they can go through all the unbeatens, hats off to them, right?
Yeah.
We saw Logan do it at SoCal. I did it at Lone Star.
Yeah.
No problem.
You could play one of the really other top players there and happen to lose, but you still have a chance, and you can always come back. Maybe it's a 50-50 matchup. You happen to lose that one. I don't mind people having a second chance.
Yes, absolutely. So I personally just like having a cut to a top bracket, and I like doing win path until then. If it's, I think 6 is the right number for a normal major, and I think you can do 8 or 9 for a super major at that point. Like, I think SoCal only needed 8 to have an undefeated, but they did 9 anyway, just to have it 9 rounds, which is fine. But like, I wouldn't have been mad if it was 8.
Yeah. And then in terms of the time itself for a particular round, I like 3-hour rounds. I think that gives you plenty of time. But I wouldn't really care if it was 2:45.
Yeah.
But I like 3 hours at Games Workshop hasn't been fine. Most people finish well before then, depending on what army you're playing.
Yeah, 3 is
but
good
it
for me.
allows you to play out a game. It allows people. I like that it allows people of all skill levels to play out their games.
Yes.
And not rush. Not
I like that you can have that little conversation beforehand and not feel out of it. Because I played 2.5-hour rounds, and what kind of happened was like, I was like finishing up a sandwich. Like, I sat down, I talked to a guy, someone I've known for a while, and we're chatting it up. I'm like, hey, my army does? He's like, honestly, not really. I'm like, no problem, I got you. And like all of a sudden we're deploying, and it's like, you now have 1 hour left each. I'm like, what? I'm like, I have an hour to play my game?
Yeah.
Like, that didn't feel like enough. So I like 3 hours a lot for round times.
I think 3 hours is the perfect amount.
Yep.
Let's see. Maybe it should be swapped back to top-down pairing for final rounds.
Yeah, I don't mind if there's like a top cut that's either a top cut I think is the easiest, or maybe for round 6 they use Swiss, have the 1 and 2 play, etc. But I like random win path for like the first day or 2 of a tournament.
Yeah, it feels so much better.
Everything but the last day I think needs to be win path. The last day, if you want to make it Swiss or if you want to make it like a cutoff system, either way, I'm all right with that. I would not be opposed.
There's a team tournament in Florida, bet you won't go because you're scared?
Yep. Okay. I didn't even know there was a team tournament in Florida, so I imagine it's
John,
not
you should
big.
know every tournament in Florida.
I do, which makes me surprised. I'm guessing it is small, but maybe. Yeah, if you want to do what is it? You can do a cut like Games Workshop did. You may not need 9, but also LVO is coming, and LVO is probably gonna need 10. That's
Ghost round, baby.
Ghost round. Oh, my kingdom to get away from.
The sweet 10-0.
Like, I've never had to play a ghost round. I know.
You went to sleep early. I was like, I'm playing.
I
Ghost
stayed
round.
up for you. I watched your game. I just
you got
did
to
it
relax
in my pajamas while eating ice cream.
I was like, another round. I got this, no problem.
Machine doesn't sleep.
Major delays doesn't matter.
Yep.
Do you feel unified terrain sets can exist outside of what GW is proposing that can be accepted by a majority of player base?
100%.
They are pretty much all those formats that we mentioned are accepted.
Yeah.
Like, nobody's like, this is illegitimate, this is silly.
Yeah. They're all regional to an extent, but if it's accepted in the United States, that's a pretty big region. Same thing. WTC is fairly accepted in Europe, and I think Australia, uses a decent amount of WTC as well.
I think the main the main thing here is that each of these tournament formats that we mentioned are willing to make changes to help improve it.
Yes.
Whether it's just changes between editions, changes based on how the meta is going, changes to just make it so that your games play out in a more interesting fashion. All of them have adapted and have changed, like we mentioned, whether throughout 9th edition or from 8th to 9th. And that is a huge part. If you are going to be a terrain format, you need to be willing to change.
Yep.
So I'm very happy that all of them are willing to take on feedback and change. How can you like cuts like a GW where somebody who went X and 1 can get a lower final placing than
That's targeted.
X and 4?
I mean, frankly, I don't love that. I think that they should make their cut a little bit later. Like, I would rather see the cut go after 5 or 6 rounds. But inevitably, that's going to happen. I think the only way to avoid that is to have the cut happen and no one below it plays. Which, you know what? People want to play 40k. Why stop people from playing 40k, right?
Yeah.
Because you see at SoCal, like, yes, you can have a 5-1 player not make it and a 5-1 player who makes it. Well, that 5-1 player is going to go 5-2 at worst. And they're never going to have a worse record, so to say. But I think any answer that leads to more people getting to play as much 40k as they want to play cannot be the wrong answer. If you're going to an event, play as many rounds as you can, right? Like, I can't complain about that.
Yeah.
So,
I don't mind it, but I would prefer an extra round.
I think a later cut and then after maybe do 5 rounds, then cut to 8. Like, I think that'd be just as good.
Helbricht is going to remain. That's for sure.
I don't think Helbricht needs a nerf.
He's a slow melee man.
I really don't. Helbricht is good. I love Helbricht.
Let him hit hard.
Yeah, he's allowed to hit hard. He moves 6 inches. He can't advance the charge. He'll be all right.
All right, John.
All right.
Big takeaways about terrain formats.
I mean, big takeaways is that it is going to shape the meta, and you always want to be keeping in mind.
Terrain is the key defensive mechanic of this game. That's the number one defensive mechanic. Forget what's in your codex. It starts with terrain. If your terrain is poor, it's going to result in a bad player experience. So you need good terrain.
Yes.
And the best terrain that we've seen has a lot of obscuring ruins, particularly ones that block line of sight on the first floor.
And I think the common factor is that if the terrain can protect you from directional shooting on turn 1, it is at least tall enough to play on. And if it's not that, it's just not meeting the standard. And we've seen all of these formats make changes at some point in the last year or so, and for a reason.
Yep.
If you don't meet that level, you're not going to be a great
damage
format
has shot up dramatically in 9th edition. You need terrain that actually fits with what the current meta is like. And there seems to be no decrease in the amount of destructive abilities these codexes can put at. The ability to play for the bracket champ is kind of neat. I think it forces the early cut though.
That's true. Yeah, the bracket champ part is kind of cool.
It's cool. I like that we get to see all that.
Apparently, I left a chainsaw there for that. Adaptive subroutines go into the corners.
Ed, you're gonna have to figure that out with your own amazing brain.
Absolutely.
Your amazing mind.
Let's go into the corners.
If you want to check out our social media, we went ahead and posted a puzzle on there. If people like this, we're gonna keep doing it. So let us know in the feedback. But it is Drukhari versus Admet puzzle situation. One last question: are second floors relevant now?
I still like second floors.
I like second floors for that. It allows those fly units, to actually get up there if they roll the distance.
Yeah, I like moving up, using it as a vantage point to shoot. I get I'm getting shot back, but you know what? I don't want to get charged by buggies.
No, that is fair.
One thing to get shot by the buggies. Charging is unacceptable.
You don't want them proccing freeboot as a melee. That's for sure. But otherwise, there's a lot of major tournament formats out there. All of them have their upsides. Some of them have some downsides. But for all of them, regardless, you need practice on them. They play in very particular ways. And going into those events, you need to have the terrain format built into your list design. You need to tailor your list specifically for that tournament format. And if you're just running the same list, regardless, it's probably isn't as efficient as it could be.
Yeah, most certainly.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Hope you enjoyed this talk on the main terrain tournament formats that are out there right now. We're gonna keep doing stuff. John and I are going to be back later this week on YouTube.
That's true.
We are going to be doing a faction tier list. We haven't done one in a while. We've been waiting for enough books to come out, but it is time. John and I are going to work through every faction on tier list and tell you.
Will be hot. That's all I'm saying.
Spicy.
There
Are we
will
going to
be some
see Knights in
spicy
B
chase.
tier this time?
No, I think they're going up to A tier. More confident.
It's just a
the
picture.
three blades.
It's just a Majera, baby.
Woo!
So we're going to find out. But I'm very excited for that. And of course, we got some interesting stream matches this week. We've got Custodes versus Grey Knights on YouTube on Tuesday.
Silver and gold.
And then on Thursday, who is playing, John?
That is going to be me playing Adeptus Sororitas into Nick. And Nick is taking Mike Porter's tournament-winning Eldar list.
Yep.
Nick can't write his own Eldar lists. Fortunately, Mike decided to show him how it's done. And Nick's going to be testing it out against me. Harlequins, indirect. It is not what a Sisters player wants to see,
No.
but I think we're going to persevere.
John's got tricks.
Yeah, we're going to make it through. No problem.
And then in the War Room this week, we've got a awesome matchup. We got Admech. I'm going to be doing a more older style Admech list. I'm going to be running the Lucius Mars version that people like Manny Chima have been doing super well with.
Not bad.
Up against John Lennon playing his new Tyranids.
Yes, I am.
He's practicing for Warzone, so we'll probably do that terrain format.
Yep.
So
Talk a little bit about that terrain format there. I'm really excited about Tyranids. I want to test them into all the best things. Of course, you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. So Richard's Admech is next in line. We'll see how that one goes.
Oh, yeah. So hopefully you'll tune in for all that content. Thanks so much, everybody. We're going to send you off for a little promo of that War Room.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
Dive even deeper into competitive 40K and become a member of the world's most knowledgeable and positive community.
The War Room is an exclusive group that brings together the world's best 40K players as coaches to help anyone from a newer player to an experienced tournament veteran learn, grow, and reach their goals with our shared hobby.
Each week we offer a variety of live stream coaching matches centered around illuminating the thought process and in-game decision making of top players. We explain everything we're doing and why.
You'll learn about the ever-evolving meta, match play mission theory, list making, and discussion of every faction in the game, and have access to analysis of all the latest rules. Our team of highly experienced coaches teach weekly clinics on each individual faction, strategy sessions on deployment and cool tricks, and meta-analyses each week during Meta Monday.
We are committed to not only providing the best knowledge for players available, but also building a one-of-a-kind community.
Come be a part of the War Room.